Well, welcome to our early Buddhism session. And we have on the stage today three scholars who, in very different ways, have completely rewritten the early history of this religion and the art history and archaeology associated with it. We're going to go first to Robin. All three of them are going to give a little presentation, and then I'm going to grill them at the end, and then I'm going to let you grill them afterwards. Robin has been digging important Buddhist sites in Sri Lanka and in Lumbini and across the border in Nepal. And he has found, well, I won't spoil his thunder, but he has radically transformed our understanding of the very earliest era of Buddhism, an era which we knew very little about and which Robin's excavations have illuminated to an extraordinary extent. Everyone here from India will know Naman Ahuja, our greatest art historian teaching in JNU, the new BNG, the taking on the mantle of BN Goswami, and the late Kavita Singh, who we miss, his colleague who left us a couple of years ago. His department is an extraordinary powerhouse of education in this subject, but Naman himself has produced a steady stream of remarkable work, and this summer was on the headlines across the world and on every news station in the world when he realized that the sacred relics of Lord Buddha were being commercially put up for sale by Sotheby's in Hong Kong. And he initiated a whole series of actions which ended up with the Indian government retrieving the remains of Lord Buddha, and they're now on show in Delhi. So we have a huge amount to thank Naman about. Naman's going to talk about that. It's been his particular passion over the last few months. And finally, Sonya, whose work on the very beginnings of Jain and Buddhist art in Mathura. It was the subject of her PhD. She's a second-generation scholar. Her mother is one of the fundamental pillars of our understanding of Chinese Buddhist art, and she has taken on this flame forward into India. And her work is absolutely astonishing, and I forced her to go back 20 years to her PhD today to tell us about some of the things she discovered. But basically, where the origins of figurative Buddhist art may lie. Today, we associate Mathura in this country very much more with the legends of Krishna and the whole stories associated with that. But I wouldn't say before that, but alongside that is this other tradition of early Jain and Buddhist devotion and art which comes out of it. So we're going to have all three of them, and I think, Robin, do you want to kick off?
Yes, thank you. If I could have the first slide, please. Oh, perfect. Okay. Lumbini is known to everyone, as Willie says, as the birthplace of the Buddha. But many of the images that we're used to are images created by craftspeople who were never there, who had no idea of actually what the architecture was like, what the color palettes were like this example created in Afghanistan, depicting the nativity scene. So Lumbini also had been lost, so forgotten its location, still a sacred site, but actually steadily individuals like General Cunningham began to use the Chinese pilgrim itineraries to search for the key sites. Lumbini, the birthplace.
No relation, we should ask. No Cunningham and Cunningham, not related.
I always like to say we are the same clan, and I did say that my grandfather was born in India and was a general, so I try to slip around these things. So these individuals were searching for the four great sites. Steadily, Mahabodhi was identified, Sarnath, Kushinagara, but Lumbini was the most difficult, the one that people were searching for. So it was discovered in 1896, rediscovered by General Rana, who was the Nepali governor there, and also a rather eclectic archaeologist called Dr. Fuhrer, later exposed, as Charles Allen showed in his books, as a fraud. And it was discovered just across the border in Nepal. And you can see this very odd sort of bulge in the map there. And of course, the smoking gun is the Asokan edict that they cleared, that they identified, which actually mentions that the Emperor Asoka himself came in person, that the village was called Lumbini Game, the village of Lumbini, therefore giving really very clear one-to-one from the 3rd century BC evidence that actually Lumbini had been identified. A very neglected but brilliant archaeologist from Bengal, P.C. Mukherjee, seen here in the slide, was the one who actually excavated the site. He cleared around the pillar that you can just see poking out in this photograph. He found the nativity image of the Buddha being born, and therefore all of this brought together to the place that we know as Lumbini in the 1890s. This is a photograph I took 29 years ago when I first came to Lumbini, because that huge mound had been excavated by the Japanese Buddhist Federation. They removed temple after temple after temple and exposed what they thought was the earliest structure at the site, belonging to the 3rd century BC and the Emperor Asoka, and here is the pillar, covered by a tin roof at that time. In 2002, a brick structure, I cannot call it a temple, a brick structure, concrete structure was erected over it, and now over 1.2 million pilgrims a year go and visit. As part of the Japanese Funds and Trust for UNESCO, I was part of the archaeology team that actually had the privilege to excavate below the floor of the Maya Devi temple with my colleagues Kosh Prasad Acharya and also Basanta Bidari. We began by first clearing the Asokan structure, measuring about 28 meters by 18 meters. In the peripheries along the edges, we found whitewashed plaster and also roof tile. Nothing in the center that was a void. So using, at that time, very sort of rudimentary reconstruction, we began to build up the color palette. If you imagine the Rhie is very vibrant, it's very green, and there in the 3rd century BC, the Emperor Asoka erects this structure. Timber walls, timber frame, mud walls, whitewashed, and then a tile, a vivid red tile sitting there, but the center empty, not covered by roof tile. So that gave us an idea. When we excavated underneath it, as archaeologists, we get that privilege, 0.5 meter below, enshrined underneath the Emperor Asoka's temple, was an earlier building, following exactly the same platform, but built of bricks which were amazingly huge. 50 centimeters by 40 centimeters, each weighing 20 kg. The same footprint, and in the center, raised on edge, that bottom right slide, actually forming a curb around this central void. There again is an idea, but this is pre-Asokan, one of the earliest pre-Asokan monuments we have.
Do we have many other pre-Ashokan Buddhist monuments?
Some people would say Vaisali has one, but really of this size, this is the only one. When you look at it as well...
We're looking here at, in other words, the oldest Buddhist building in the world.
We are looking at the oldest Buddhist structure in the world. We also begin to understand the floors are empty, they're clear. Normally, archaeologists, we're clearing out bone, we're clearing out pottery. This has been kept clean, this floor. This floor is exceptionally clean. In the center around the curb, the brickwork's been replaced. So this is where the activity happens. In the peripheral areas, the brickwork is pristine. So whatever happening is happening right in the center. That's where the brick's being worn. Begins to give us an idea of Buddhist practice, and also animals. There are no evidence of animal remains. On the village mound that's about 300 meters away, it's full of pottery, it's full of animal bones with cut marks. Here, it's completely free of that sort of material. So many of those aspects that we think of Buddhism, non-violence, actually we're finding here in these very early periods. When we removed that set of bricks, the brick curb, we found strikingly underneath the curb was a 6th century BC timber line, a timber fence. Now, we were really lucky. There was a Nat Geo team there, so it was all recorded. So we have evidence. But this, dating to the 6th century BC, is also one of the few examples we have of a monument which is almost the date of the Buddha's life. So I'm a great...
This is as close as we're going to get.
This is 20 years ago, people said there is zero chance of finding layers associated with the life of the Buddha. And here we have enshrined, protected by those later temples. And most sites, unfortunately, Bodh Gaya will never get permission to excavate there. But actually, it shows what can be done with the heritage science. That central void, and you'll have seen a sort of an AI tree in some of these, the central void, we picked up mineralized tree root in the thin sections. So we also have evidence of composting. So the soil around this central void actually is composted. People are probably bringing plants, probably bringing flowers. We have, again, evidence of very early tradition. And also a tree in Lumbini. Here, this is taken from Bagan. This is an example of the nativity scene where Maya Devi very classically is holding the tree. And here, and the Buddha's coming out of the side. And here we actually have archaeology and tradition and science coming together to support that narrative. And then finally, finally, heritage science is amazing. We took mud from those lowest levels, and you can do gas chromatography, which looks at the different signatures that are left in the mud. So we've identified the unique signature of Ficus religiosa. So we even know the species of the tree in that very earliest shrine.
And that tree happens to be?
The Bodhi tree. The Bodhi tree, Ficus religiosa.
And not a Shala tree,
and not text. A Shala tree. And we tested Shala, we tested a Soka tree. So this gives us this amazing insight, and it shows how actually tradition, how heritage science can actually come together and answer questions that really we thought there was no ability to ever inquire.
Naman.
Well, thank you, Robin. I think the presence of scientific study at sites like this can significantly enhance what we know. And one of the key things to understand is that the earliest Buddhists, common sense would have it, already had pre-existing practices. It's like saying, Jesus's family was probably Jewish, and those were the practices around. So it's not the defining moment of Christianity. It's the same way, just as biblical archaeology can tell us what was going on around the time of the early Christians, so too does Buddhist archaeology, if we want to use that phrase, tell us what was happening at that time and what practices that were pre-existing practices were being changed and modified to make them more aligned with Buddhist practice. And the relic deposit at Piprahwa, which is what I've been asked to talk to you all about today, has been something that has really, it's been one of the most spectacular and special relic deposits ever found anywhere in any world religion, frankly. There's a little note in the Asiatic Society, in the Royal Asiatic Society in London, which I've put on the side, which is Vincent Smith's note dated 1898, in which he's written to the excavator, Pepe, that what he has discovered is very likely the relics is, in fact, almost certainly, he says, the relics of the Buddha himself. And he explains his reasons why. Now, I can't go into all of the details. It's going to be out in the forthcoming Marg volume, which is coming out by the end of this month or early next month. It's from the site of Piprahwa, which has a massive stupa in the center. That's an aerial photograph, and you can see on the right when it was sliced open by Pepe. And Pepe went down into the stupa at about 18 feet down. He found a brick wall under which there was a coffer. And you can see that square coffer at the base, which was pulled out. And from it were retrieved a set of caskets. There were many things found in that coffer. We haven't been able to reconstitute all the things that were found in that coffer, but some of the things we do have access to. In the middle of Piprahwa, is a stupa which is surrounded by these very grand monasteries, not just around Piprahwa stupa itself, but also a kilometer away at Ganvaria. There are major stupas. These are the relic caskets that came out. There were 5 of them. 4 of them are in this photograph. And the one that has its lid open very clearly states that this was a deposit made by the Shakyas. That's the paternal cousins, the paternal line of the Buddha, who deposited these relics in that coffer. The finding is unprecedented because of the extraordinary volume of ash, bone, charred rice, and jewels that were found in that box. The box contained lots of vases of clay and wood, as well as ash, which they contained ash. Those vases haven't been retrieved yet. There was rice, which we haven't been able to find yet, where that rice went. So critical things that we want as for archaeological study are missing. But the jewels were, of course, rather carefully, greedily, whatever, kept, preserved all these years. And they have truly, even just a study of these jewels has transformed what we know about early Buddhist archaeology, about their aesthetics. It ties up with what we know about from the Lalita Vistara, from the Mahavastu, from portions of the Digha Nikaya, key texts in Buddhism which talk about jeweled palaces, the bodies of sants who take samadhi, are believed very widely in Jain, Buddhist, and Hindu belief to turn to crystal. And so the metaphor seems to have been extended, and a lot of crystal seems to have been interred along with the bodily remains.
So all those girls in California with their crystals doing yoga are actually part of a long tradition of...
A very long tradition of believing in the prophylactic properties of different stones, but we don't actually have texts to ballast all of that kind of thinking, but we do have the physical evidence of these extraordinary stones which come from all over Asia. In fact, some of these pale pink stones and the purple stones and the deep blue stones are clearly not from the Gorakhpur area where Piprahwa is located. Instead, I mean, these are things that come from Sri Lanka, from Burma, they come from Afghanistan, they come from quarries all over South Asia and Central Asia, and so that itself is something quite extraordinary. The color palette of the stones is also quite extraordinary. It's all in extraordinary shades of pastel that built up this entire thing. I am baffled by the quality of the pearls, for instance, which have maintained their luster 2,500 years later. That is quite interesting. But for gemologists, this is interesting because we've always believed that Indian stones were cabochon in settings, and that cutting and faceting is something that comes into stones from European influence, because faceted stones are meant to reflect light and dazzle the viewer rather than cabochon stones, which are supposed to suck light in and bring them into the body of the wearer. And you find both kinds of stones here. And we didn't know so much about ancient gem cutting and faceting. And experts have now looked at these stones and been able to show that the kind of tools used to make them grew less and less, were not used after 200 BC. So it's clear that these tools, the tooling of these is quite ancient. Some of them are made into talismans like Triratnas, Nandipadas. Some of them are made into the shape of an ankush. And for those of you who are familiar with the Ashtamangala Chinha, the 8 sacred symbols of Buddhism, you'll find several of them made here. But is Piprahwa an anomaly? No. These kind of gold foil deposits, the stones themselves, they've been found at many other Buddhist sites. And this kind of practice of relic deposits goes back to megalithic burials. And so it's what was shifting, how that older practice is given Buddhist validity and sanction in the earliest definitional moments of Buddhist practice. That is what Piprahwa and other stupas like this tell us about. And I think how older traditions are transformed, whether it's yaksha worship or relic worship or burial practice, that transformation...
Maybe explain what a yaksha...
nature spirits that are personified, that become manifest. The simple word in Sanskrit is yaksh or pratyaksh, that which becomes visible. So pratyaksh, what is not pratyaksh is that which is not visible, that which is not manifest, which is divine, it's there, but it's not manifest. The idea of the word yaksh itself comes from the idea of manifestation, is what it really etymologically comes down to. And so here we get something which is being now given a Buddhist veneer in a pre-existing practice. And that's what's defining that remainder of what was already going on and how it shifts. That shift is what we call new Buddhist practice. That is what we can identify as being unique. And so this actually comes to define what we know. So they have relic deposits, but they start doing things with them. So looking at historical photographs, we don't have the entire Bourne and Shepherd archive anymore since it went up in flames. But we do have some Bourne and Shepherd pictures which show everything that was found at Piprahwa that was photographed in 1898. And in amongst them, you find these gold objects. And I don't know whether you can see in the small tray in the center, which has a particular Triskelion pattern of swirling circles of 3 lines coming together in a swirl. And that's exactly what you get on the relic casket at Nalasopara. You get the same pattern in Bhattiprolu. You get the same pattern in Nagarjunakonda. And there is something that is happening in the gold work, in the deposits at these different stupas. And looking at the kind of gold foil patterns, the kind of gem cutting that you get here, you get it at Bhattiprolu on the left, you get it at Nagarjunakonda on the right. These are the gold foils that we get at Bodh Gaya, which are found under the Vajrasan seat that Cunningham had excavated, which now lie at the British Museum. And you look at the rest of these beads and gold foil elements, the making of the gold into conch shells, which have, with these rosettes, these floral symbols alternating. The arrangement is modern, but the actual shape of the beads, you get exactly the same beads even at Piprahwa. So looking at them together, one of the great discoveries at Piprahwa is also this rock crystal relic casket. And that has been absolutely extraordinary. And if you go up close to this rock crystal casket, which is currently on view in Lado Sarai in Delhi, next to the golf course, there is a new art gallery that has just been opened, which is called Kila Rhie Pithoda. It's open till 9 p.m. every day, 7 days a week. It's on till the end of May, early June, the exhibition. Please go and see it. It's the chance of a lifetime to be able to see all of these relics in one place.
And some retrieved wonders from the Met Museum, too.
Yes, which is another story. But this particular casket is quite interesting because inside the fish knob, are filled lots of granulated gold, like a long granulated gold chain that runs through it. So it was meant to sparkle in a very particular way and have this granulated gold jewelry inside there. These fish finials go back to megalithic burials. You get them in Adichanallur, dated. We found a whole ritual context at Piprahwa. Mother goddesses, Naigameshas, fertility symbols. The practices in the monasteries around the stupa really signal the existence of older mother goddess cults being absorbed into early Buddhist practice. And the biggest sign of that was two of the gold plaques that were kept with the Buddha's ashes in the burial at Piprahwa. These two gold plaques are still missing. They haven't been found. But they include one particular goddess who has got the lady with the weapons in her hairdo, which we find in so many Shunga terracottas, including another one with the lady with the hands by her side, which we found in relic caskets all the way in Gandhara, in Mauryan ringstones across Bihar. And so there seems to be a very ancient practice of these burials that were that were now being associated with Buddhism. So I'm going to end there. I'm sorry I've run into your time, Sonya.
I'm sure you are, Naman. Thank you. No, but you've set everything up beautifully, because now coming to Mathura, which is one of the places where we first see Buddhist imagery and images of the Buddha in human figural form, and also a number of types of architectural forms emerging very early on in sculptural art. One thing that is so important to remember is how do we even define or recognize Buddhist architecture per se, and that forms that we might immediately recognize or think of as Buddhist, such as the very form of the stupa, may not necessarily be Buddhist. And especially at Mathura, beginning from the very earliest sculptures that we can date, which is to the middle of the 2nd century BCE, images of the stupa are associated with Jain sites. So these 3 examples on the screen of stupas are all Jain stupas, identified as such by inscription and also by figural imagery of Jain monks, so that make it completely clear that these are Jain sites, and that also have Naigamation and mother goddesses, as in the large-scale plaque at the right. The 2 niches at the bottom, one has Naigamation, one has a mother goddess. So not only are these groups, such as the Buddhists, drawing on pre-existing practices, but laterally also, horizontally, other groups such as the Ardhapalaka Jains, who call themselves the Nirgrantha Arhats, it was a particular sect localized in Mathura, are also drawing on the same imagery. An important form that we find primarily in Mathura, which also shows the human image of the jinnah. And now in Mathura, we already have a pre-existing predilection for human figuration of divinities of all kinds, many more iconographies in stone in Mathura than we find at any other sites. People like Skanda, Balarama, Krishna, Agni are all figured in human form. This Ardhapalaka sect of Jains in Mathura also started showing the jinnah in human form, especially on the center of these plaques called Ayagapatas. And we can see in the tympanum of this half of a tympanum, in the spandrel up there, you can see Ayagapatas set up horizontally on altars in front of a stupa, and worshippers coming to bring worship. One of the fragments in the center also show the Jain monks, naked Jain monks with the cloth over one arm, so that we're sure this is truly from a Jain site. So in the center of these Ayagapatas, we often find jinnahs, and in also the cardinal directions on the 4 sides, human images of the jinnah, as well as other synonyms for the presence of the jinnah, such as the tree shrine, a stupa, and a wheel. So really this kind of vocabulary of sanctity was common between the Jain practices and the Buddhist. And in Mathura in particular, the Jain imagery came earlier than much of the Buddhist imagery, especially the human figuration of the Buddha himself, as has followed after over 150 years of the Jains showing the Jinnah in human form. So
just to emphasize that point with clarity, so you're saying that the Jinnah images come 150 years before the very first Buddha image. In other words, that there's a more than a century of Jain depiction of a human figure, and that therefore that Mathura is likely the place where we get the very first Buddhist image?
Well, it's one place.
As
there
a human
may be
being.
other places, such as Swat, but we cannot date those images necessarily as to which came first.
This is a long debate, isn't it, between Gandhara and Mathura, which... Yeah.
Right, which we just can't resolve simply. But what we can do at Mathura is see what those local internal pressures were for Buddhists to introduce a figural image of the Buddha, because the Jains were making a tremendous amount of money. All of the inscriptions on these plaques, that have the Jinnahs and the stupas, you get tremendous financial donations coming to Jain sites.
And just explain for those who aren't familiar with this, how the Buddha was shown before we have this figurative image of the Buddha.
All kinds of ways. So non-figurally, which means in the form of an altar, a wheel, a sacred tree, a stupa.
A flaming pillar.
Those are more in the south, but that you get the idea. Yeah, so all kinds of different ways, depending on the context. But starting at around 15 CE, and we can date this because of this Kshatrapa named Shodasa. You can see on the left what I recognize as the first known or discovered image of the Buddha in human form from Mathura. And we know for sure it's Shakyamuni because the 4 Lokapalas are offering the alms bowls to him. In terms of style, it's extremely close to what the Ardhapalakas are doing with the Jinnahs. So you see the Jinnah Parshva there with the snake hoods over his head, flanked by 2 naked Jain monks of the Ardhapalaka sect, worshipping him.
What date is this?
That's about 25 BCE. Okay, from the Parshvanatha Ayagapata.
And that very first Buddhist image of the human...
About 15 CE, so first quarter of the 1st century CE.
And the first Jain image is just what?
The first Jain image is much more, about 150 BCE, and in a narrative context showing a scene from the life of Rishabha, the first of the Jinnahs. Okay, so very, very clear iconography. But once the Buddha image is introduced in Mathura, Buddhism takes off and they start getting as many donations as the Jains. And you start getting enormous architectural fragments, such as this huge architrave, which would have been what we see on the screen as an image of the front and the back of the same architrave. And even though the gateway itself is gone and we just have this architrave, it shows that there would have been a huge sacred site for the Buddhists with a massive torana. And in the center of one side is Shakyamuni Buddha in human form, this dating now to the 3rd quarter of the 1st century CE. And this is the form of the Buddha that will start to become exported all over northern India at that so-called Kapardan type of Buddha that we know as the Kushan Buddha type. But in the same location on the opposite side in the center is what Robin was talking about. It's a tree shrine, hypaethral, which means it's open air in the center, and it's a structure to which worshippers are coming, bringing lotus flowers and pots of water. And so the human image of the Buddha is just as sacred as this open air tree shrine. And so I'm just very quickly going to bring it up to date to my more recent research at the site of Cunningham, which is deep in the south in northeastern Karnataka, where there are the 4 earliest relief sculptures that face the drum of the Mahachaitya there, the big stupa there. There are 4 major images, relief sculptures of works of architecture. The Gandakuti, labeled by inscription, which is the place where the Buddha is supposed to be found in the Jetavana. And so these are 2 relief depictions of the Jetavana monastery, which is one of the Buddha's favorite monasteries. We know this by the laying of coins in the front. But what's also extraordinary is that in the relief on the right at the lower left corner, you can see an apsidal hall being worshipped there, and the inscription there says, "This is the Buddha's." So the Buddha himself at the Jetavana is being worshipped in the form of this architectural building, and his son Rahula is the Chaitya in the same form on the right. And just inside the gateway is Mother Goddess worship. So this continues into the south. two more Gandakutis with an open-air shrine, and I end on this slide to bring it back to Lumbini, because also at Cunningham in the 1st century BCE, Lumbini is reimagined here with Maya grabbing her earring, watching her newborn take 7 steps on this cloth held by the gods, holding what looks to be not a shala tree, but an ashwata tree, a ficus religiosa.
Whoa, thank you. So we've got in these 3 presentations, Buddhism today spreads out, I mean, within 300 or 400 years of these very, very first Buddhist sites, Buddhist images, Buddhism will spread up through Gandhara as far as Uzbekistan. It will spread right across Tibet, through China into Mongolia, and ultimately Siberia. It will go through China to Korea and Japan, and it will head right down to the Philippines, and now, of course, get as far as Leonard Cohen and his monastery in LA or San Francisco. This all begins here. The sites that you've been shown in these 3 extraordinary presentations, Robin shows the very first Buddhist shrine. Naman has shown the actual relics of the human being, the Buddha. Sonya has showed us the moment that you get the first picture of the Buddha. And it's all in the area within, 400 or 500 miles of where we're sitting now. Yeah. And Mathura, in particular, is the place where so much imagery, both Hindu and Buddhist. Do you want to just explain that, just in very populist terms, how much of what we know comes from this one extraordinary site, Mathura? Right,
and I think it's this impulse towards interaction with the manifest that was, and actually in Ashwagosha's Buddha Charita, right, which is a biography of the Buddha complains, there are so many yakshas in Mathura, I don't want to go there. So there's just, it was famous as a place where multiple divinities of all kinds made themselves manifest in human form, including Krishna as a Vrishni hero. So before he's recognized as Krishna as such. So the Vrishni hero cult was extremely strong, as it is in Berenike, right? And also way up in
So just explain that reference. So in this new excavation in the Red Sea coast of Egypt, inside a temple to the Egyptian goddess Isis, have been found a picture of the Buddha, which is on Proconnessian marble from the Marmara Sea, sculpted in Alexandria using a drill that's only in use in workshops in Alexandria. So the tortellini curls of the Buddha's head are carved with it. So we know, and yet it's commissioned by an Indian sea captain. And next to that was found, in the same site, explain what these early hero images are.
Yes, the Vrishni heroes of the Vrishni clan are Krishna, his brother Balarama, and his sister Ekanamsha. So it's a triad.
And so what we see in Egypt is one of the very first images, again, it starts in Mathura, but it's reached Egypt by 100 AD?
Yes, and in Mathura you have them from the 2nd century BC.
Amazing. Robin, just give us a quick idea of your new work. You've just discovered something very exciting on the Nepalese border.
Yes, so next week we're starting working at a site called Tilarakot, which is identified by many as the Buddha's childhood home, the ancient city of Kapilavastu. There we've been...
And it straddles the border. The border sits right in the middle.
Indeed. The border, and one of the challenges is that modern geopolitical borders never reflect ancient borders. So the site of Piprahwa is about 20 kilometers away. Yep. So it's just the modern border which sort of divorces the landscape and the sites. And there we have this amazing city site. We've done heritage science, archaeological geophysics, picked up beautifully planned city site from the 6th century BCE with the most amazing gridiron pattern, which, of course, pre-exists in terms of, often people think it's Greek influence of grid plan coming in from the northwest of areas of Pakistan and then sweeping in. We've already got it
strong
here.
resistance to that idea here.
Indeed, but now we have evidence of much earlier grid plan there across the border in Nepal. And there, in the ruins of the old palace, We have a monastery that's built in the Kushana period, so first centuries CE, and in the middle of that is an apsidal temple that we've just picked up the very part of the apse. It's got stupas inside, and it's identical to Sarnath, where there's a similar monument, and Sarnath is where the
So again,
Buddha's...
just to clarify for those that don't get the chronology,
Yeah.
when is the very first temple that we've got in India anywhere?
It depends if you want to push it back
What's
to
a
the
temple?
Bronze Age, and you know, you go to the Indus. We have some apparently tree shrines. We have
In Indus Valley
in
seals.
the Indus Valley, where John Marshall excavated a few sites where there are rings of brick, which he identified, and also some of the seals have a yakshi sitting within a tree. So there are
And this is not so
elements.
common in India today, but we've just come back from Sri Lanka,
Yeah.
where you see these tree shrines very much still in worship,
Absolutely.
in site after
and,
site.
And
Yeah.
in a way, that's part of the success of Buddhism, in that actually the trees can be propagated and they can be dispersed and sent. So 3rd century BCE, a tree is sent from Bodh Gaya, a cutting, to Anuradhapura, and it's planted there. Its descendant is still there today. So trees are remarkably diplomatic.
So we officially run out of time, but as director of this festival, I'm going to take a special director's privilege to ask Naman just very, very quickly to tell us the story of how you saved the Buddha for India. We've got 4 minutes.
Gosh. For many years, I have taught classes on the importance of continuities and the kind of issues I was talking about, and Piprahwa happens to be one of the many sites that I look at and talk about. One of my very good students, Sohaib, had been listening to my classes, and a couple of years after he graduated, he contacted me one day and said that, brought to my notice that the relics were up for sale at Sotheby's in Hong Kong, and the very things that I'd been showing in my classes. And I indeed checked out the website and found that Sotheby's was selling them. And
In Christian terms, this would be, you know, the wood of the cross, or the kind of, you know, this is the most sacred relics imaginable of this religion.
the relics have unfortunately been mired in controversy ever since their excavation, where canards have been raised about their authenticity. But the canards are not entirely without good reason. Führer, whom Robin mentioned a little while ago, was the head of the
crook.
epigraphy. Was head of the epigraphy branch of the ASI, and in 1898 was stationed at Lumbini, where Robin's been excavating now, and he received an urgent letter from Gorakhpur so Piprahwa is in Basti district. It's now called Siddharth Nagar, and it's only about 18 kilometers in one direction to Lumbini, 20 kilometers in the other direction to Tilora Court. And he sent a message to Lumbini, where Führer was, and asked that the inscription that he had found on the relic casket be read by him. Vincent Smith was also involved. They certified that these were indeed the relics of the Buddha and what the inscription said. There was an extraordinarily large amount of ash that was, as I said, found at that site. And then the Treasure Trove Act of India, which had only just come into implementation, allowed finders or landlords to be keepers, if not finders. And a fifth of the findings, he was given title by the local DM, the magistrate in Gorakhpur, to keep a fifth of the findings, and the other 4/5 was sent to the Indian Museum in Calcutta. This fifth, many claims were made on this fifth by different bodies. Sri Lankan monks, the Thai royal family, priesthoods in Burma and in Ceylon and Siam in particular. Portions of the relics were given to different venerable bodies over the years. But it was also discovered that Führer, who had been the head of Indian epigraphy, had been forging inscriptions and relics on the side and ingratiating monks in Burma, particularly, with them. And doubts were therefore cast on the authenticity of the Piprahwa hoard. This has been very convenient for governments all these years, because can you imagine owning the originals? I mean, it's so scary to own the originals as private property and then to know what you're going to do with them, because the Shakyas, by covenant on this particular casket, made them into public property. They gave it in trust to the monastic establishment and made a stupa around the entire matter for people to worship. Now somebody has been given private title on that property, and so they have to now...
Naman, I can see we're running out of time. Can we fast forward to you saving these relics?
I don't think I have any... I helped the government of India draft a legal notice to serve onto Sotheby's that stopped the sale. Stop. That's it.
And they're now in Ladussarai. You can all go on your way back to Delhi. If those of you who are going back to Delhi, it is all on show. You can see the stuff that would be now in some private collection in Switzerland or California. It's now a property of the Indian state, and it's on show, thanks to Naman, in Delhi.
What a brilliant final conclusion. That was amazing.